will be about clinical data science. So please welcome on stage with me the Professor Jean-Louis Raisaro, head of the Clinical Data Science Group at CHUV. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you. So thank you for the invitation and for having me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a glimpse of what kind of AI we're doing at CHUV, clinical AI, and how we can do this with trust. So it's pretty cool because it's aligned a little bit with what was presented before. So of course we know that AI has a great potential in medicine, right? To increase vision, better anticipate potential risks, for learning opportunities, but also for greater efficiency, right? But in reality, what happens is that AI is still marginal in our healthcare system, especially in hospitals, and there are many reasons for that. One reason is the data, right? So data is dispersed, is stored in different silos. So having access to high quality, large data set is essential to develop AI, and this is hard, so not all hospitals have this possibility. Another element is a limited infrastructure. So we can have the data, but we also need to be AI ready in terms of infrastructure. So we need to be able to welcome models and operate these models in routine systems. And then lack of integration. So what we see is that most of the model comes as black box, so there's not really a thought on how to integrate this in clinical workflows. So it's really hard, to integrate something that is not something clinicians are used to work with, and also adoption by clinician, right? So there's a lot about building trust and adoption, working hand in hand with clinicians. So all of this essentially is what we try to do, is trying to bridge the gap, right? So bridging the gap between the technology. So we're expert in technology, but we try really to work with clinicians, people, and try to understand behavior systems and integrate those tools into actual clinical workflows. So I brought here 3 examples that go from predictive analytics to large language models that I'm going to present to you. So these are some of the most mature projects we have. So the first one is an AI tool that can predict hospital-acquired complications. So this is something that happens usually in all patients that stay long at the hospital. So we focused on pressure injuries that are very nasty type of complication that can reach 20% incidence in patients above 65. And the development of this complication can trigger a so-called cascade of other complications. So increase the length of stay of the patient, so increase cost, and so on and so forth. So what we tried to do was to develop a system that we call Merlin that is able to use routine clinical data, so data that we can find regularly in the electronic health records of a hospital, and then try to predict the risk, right? The risk of a patient having a pressure injury. And the goal is to replace essentially the standard of care, which requires nurses to go at the patient bedside, collect extra data, and compute a so-called Braden score, which is the clinical gold standard today to measure the risk of pressure injuries. And because there's a resource constraint in every department, at least in the CHUV, the computation of Braden cannot happen regularly on every patient, so it can only be done on patients that are considered more at risk every 48 hours. So, of course, there's a high risk of missing some patients, right? The advantage of AI is that we can compute this every hour for every patient. So we developed the model, but this was not the most interesting part. We showed that essentially with some standard machine learning technique, we can beat the predictive power of Braden, so less false positive. But what was the interesting part is what came next. So we had the model, and then we had really co-design sessions with nurses and clinicians on how to best design a user interface that could bring back the information to them in an actionable way. And then we implemented this in a dashboard, in different dashboards where we can see a unit view with distribution of patients per level of risk, and then a patient view where we can see the evolution of the risk for a given patient. And then with some other information that can be used by nurses. And actually, this system is now a companion to the electronic health records that is used in a pilot in 6 units by roughly 100 nurses in the hospital, with the goal of not evaluating the efficacy of the system or the safety of the system, but just to study the implementation barriers. So we want to understand what can favor adoption of the system and use of these systems, or what can actually be a limitation, and try to address them. Try to come up with some learnings for the future systems to come. Of course, the key takeaways for these projects is that we have shown that with AI and with data that is messy, not clean, inaccurate, incomplete, we can still do predictions that are better than what clinical scores can do today. And we can automate this and have predictions every hour for every patient. So this is a big step where we can reallocate resources from nurses on tasks where they can bring more value. And of course, the next step is to expand the models on multiple other complications. The second project I want to talk to you about is about sepsis and how we used AI to improve sepsis quality of care and management overall. So for those of you who don't know sepsis is one of the leading causes of hospital death. So it's a syndrome, so it's not a disease, and it's multifactorial, so it's very difficult to recognize when it's early in its manifestation, because it can be confused with an infection. But then when we're able to recognize it clinically, then it's over too late to give whatever treatment, and then the patient goes in septic shock and can die. So it's a very interesting and fascinating project, topic and challenge that has been around in the medical AI community for many years. So most of the people have tried to predict sepsis before it occurs and try to raise an alarm to clinical teams, for example, in the intensive care unit, to say, okay, there's an alarm, this patient might have sepsis, do something with him. We took another approach. So what we tried to do is to build a so-called learning health system, where instead of trying to do a prospective prediction, we're looking back in the past. So we're looking back in the past when a patient has already been discharged. What we do is that we train an AI to try to recognize if the patient in the past had a sepsis or not. Why is that important? It's important because sepsis is hard to recognize for clinicians, therefore is not documented. And whenever we try to have an overview of what happens in terms of quality of care in the hospital, this overview, it's just an underestimation of what's happening, and it's highly biased. So therefore, the algorithm can bring more reliable indication of sepsis. So we built a whole machine learning pipeline. But at the end of the day, what happens is that we can bring this information back to the institution and show a map where we can see what are the units that are performing badly on sepsis, so creating new knowledge that clinicians can use to intervene with different measures like trainings, recall best practices, and so on. So that's where we implement this virtuous circle of learning health system, because through AI, we take data, create knowledge, and then from knowledge, we influence the practice. And what's interesting is that in the end, this is not considered a medical device. So we bypass essentially the regulations that would have been a sort of a challenge for deploying a prospective system to predict sepsis, but it's something that works in the background, right? And today we have a very surprising, I mean, not surprising for us, but like incredible impact, where we show here on the left, mortality, in-hospital mortality. So since the deployment of the system that happened in 2021 progressively across several units in the hospital, we managed to reduce mortality. So what we observe is that in units using the system, mortality has dropped of 20% relative. Whereas in controlled units, who have a similar population but do not use the system, there's no drop in mortality. And another type of impact, which is not a clinical outcome, but it's more an administrative outcome, It's here on the right. So we see that thanks to the system, we can also better document sepsis and also have 1 million cost recovery per year for the hospital. So there's an impact on quality of care and an impact on cost recovery and finances for the hospital. So of course, the next step is to transfer the same system in other hospitals. We currently have a project also in collaboration with the Swiss Data Science Center of EPFL to expand this to Bern and Zurich and see if this generalizes across multiple centers. The last projects I want to talk to you about will be very brief. It's about large language models. So as many hospitals in Switzerland, we have started our own internal project on large language models. Why it's important to have an internal LLM instead of using commercial ones. There are many reasons: patient privacy, we can adapt these models to local context, and so on. So we started with a project in 4 phases, where the first phase is really try to bring clinicians as evaluators of these models and try to use preferences of clinicians to align the model to our local practices and local needs. So we teamed up with EPFL, where we took Meditron, which is an open source model aligned to medical context developed by EPFL, which is on par with other open source large language models. And then we managed to involve around 300 clinicians across 20 departments who challenged the model and performed more than 10,000 evaluations across 20 different medical disciplines through a platform called The Move. And then today we have an overview where we can compare as a leaderboard different models that are out there and understand under different axes what are the best for our needs. And here Meditron we see has a quite good performance in terms of accuracy, structure and logic, safety, usefulness and trust and communication, but also variability across medical disciplines, which shows that there's room for improvement. And more interestingly, what we did is that we used the clinicians' preferences to create a new version of Meditron that we named Meditron CHUV, which is currently being evaluated as a comparison with Meditron CHUV and base Meditron. And we see actually that the number of clinical feedback was so important to improve Meditron CHUV that is preferred in 70% of the cases. Voilà, so final slide, sorry for the long talk. So of course, I hope you understood, right, that AI is coming, right? We're talking about that. And it's not just about performance metrics, it's a lot about co-creation, collaborations, involving clinicians and all the other stakeholders from the beginning, which was also what my previous speaker talked about.
So
Thank you.
interesting, Professor. Very glad to have you on stage. Thank you so